So today we are going to be talking to Kelly Thibualt. And Kelly has worked for over a decade in the program management space, driving operations, people development, and process improvement, and even made a pivot from higher ed into tech. Today, I really want to dig into the idea of what is program management and what does a program manager job actually entail. As a program manager, what would you say you're doing on the day-to-day?
I think it partially depends what your role as a program manager is, because there's so many different varieties of it. I would say when I was in learning and development and I had a function of a program manager, a lot of what I did was checking in with my stakeholders, checking in with the people I was working with, and making sure that the program I was running was in line with my audience, essentially. So I was doing learning and development for engineering, product, and design. And I did build out the program, but then we had to keep iterating. So was I meeting the needs of new hires? Was I meeting the needs of those that, continuing employees? How were we helping with retention? Were we filling gaps? And so I was doing a lot of data and research, talking to people, doing a lot of interviews, but then also taking that back and theming it out like you would in qualitative research to then determine what's going to be the next step for the program. What's going to work best? What do we need to improve upon? And even in higher ed, I would say the day-to-day was very similar in that sense of when I was running a program, what was working well, what wasn't working well, was I meeting people's needs, or was the program meeting the needs? And if not, then what could we be doing better to better serve our population? So I think that's a really big thing, is that you're running this program and it's for someone or a group of people, and you need to figure out if it's working and if it's not. And depending on the industry, you're constantly iterating. So even if it is working, how can it work better? How can it be more efficient? And at times you may be a program manager with direct reports as well. And so then how do they fit into that? And how do you support them in maximizing what they're doing?
I think something that you mentioned in there that is important to think about as well. A key element of that in that role is how many different people you're interacting with. It's a very large part of being a program manager. Who would you say you're interacting with on a day-to-day?
You're interacting with the team that you're on. You may be talking through your challenges and your successes and figuring out like how you can get better leverage. You're working with the people who are participating in your program. And then sometimes you may even be working with your C-suite or executives, and that may be through your manager. It may not be. One program I ran was the idea of the president of the university. And so a lot of my approvals had to get signed off through the president's office. And I did that through the hierarchy of the institution. But basically, I was writing documents and they were getting sent up to the president's office for approval and for sign off, and to actually launch the program and then run it. And then she expected to have us do metrics and know how it was going. And I had to make sure that those communications were appropriate for an executive. And so it really depends where your role sits and who you're working with, but it could be anyone.
It could be anyone. That's a good way to sum it up, like depending on what the program is. And I often think about it as being a very kind of like a customer service type job. Like you have to understand how to interact with people and how to have a high level of emotional intelligence and negotiate and influence and persuade people to really like get your program managed. Would you say that you would agree with that?
People skills is a huge part of program management. Influencing without authority is a major part, because most of the time it's not a management level role, even though it has the word manager in it. You're working much like a product manager at times. Like you are bringing people together, but you don't have that director title to have the authority with the title. So you have to influence people through leadership and relationships. And so collaboration and relationship building is really, really impactful and important to success.
So let's say someone is thinking about shifting into program management, jump into that role, and very often you are having to ask a lot of questions because most programs have a lot of moving parts and pieces and people involved. What are some of the questions you think you're asking? Like, give me an example of a time where you took on a program management position and then you were like trying to get up to speed and asking questions. Like, what are the questions you're asking of people?
Yeah. So I would say one piece is that I have a consistency of being brought in to build out things. So the questions I'm asking as someone who's building out the program are going to be different than someone who's coming into an existing program. So that's my frame of experience. But a lot of questions I come in and ask is what's working and what's not working. If in your ideal world, what would the program look like? Or what would people gain from the program? So when I came in to do an L&D program, they had a basic onboarding design, but part of my role was to build that out. And I sat down with individual contributors, with managers, with senior managers, with executives, and said, what are people lacking? What are our new hires not? What do they need to have to be successful at week one, month one, 6 months in, year one? What should those skills look like? And then would take that and backtrack and say, okay, what can we do to make sure that they meet those metrics? Because these are what the team members are looking for. And then asking recently hired folks, what did you struggle most with when you joined? So trying to ask people at all different levels and different experiences and viewpoints of what gap can this program help fill? Like what's been missing to you? What do you wish would happen? And how can we make your experience better? Because I think program management, especially if it's focused on the employees, that it can be a huge aspect of employee retention. And so thinking of that, especially in the times that we're in right now where people are changing jobs, is how does your program contribute to getting people up to speed if it's focused at the beginning of their journey, and then keeping them engaged if it's beyond that. And the biggest thing about program management is that you may be the expert in running the program, but you are not the expert in the content of the program for the most part. So who are your subject matter experts, and are you getting the information you need from them? Because if you come in and you think you know everything about all of it, you're probably going to struggle.
I love that you call that out as well. Like, yeah, I don't think you should go into any job thinking that you're the expert, right? That's a recipe for
right. No.
But you do highlight a good one good challenge of the role there, right? And so it's a good segue into the next question, which is like when you start in a program management role, what do you think are some of the challenges that you're faced with in that job? And maybe there's a key distinction here between an industry like higher ed and tech, or it could be that there are some challenges that really follow through regardless of what industry you're in.
I would say this can be true with both of them, but especially in higher ed, is understanding the history of the program. So even if it's new, understanding how it came to be, why people thought it was a priority enough to hire someone. So understanding the history. When I was younger in my career, I came in and I tried to say, well, we should do something this way because I've seen it in other institutions and it worked really great. And I was quickly corrected, I guess would be a nice way to put it. The way it was handled was done really well, but I was quickly schooled on how I should ask questions before offering suggestions when I don't know the history. So finding out the history, and that can be a challenge at times because you come in with you're starting a job, you're excited, you have ideas, you just want to hit the ground running. And I am definitely someone who jumps in the deep end with both feet. So I get that it's really hard to hold back and say, okay, I'm going to find out what's happened before, what's been successful, what hasn't been successful, and then go from there. People have a lot of feelings about things that they've built or been a part of. And so when you're changing things that people have investment in, that can feel very personal, even though we know it's not, but it feels that way. And so that's a great point to leverage your manager as well, to say, like, I want to make these changes. How should I navigate that? I've had to do that at a job before. And then the other challenge is building relationships. And building relationships is really hard. I think with our virtual environment, it's even more challenging. Like, I know usually I would just go and like say, hey, can I sit with you at lunch, or you want to grab a coffee? And so there's intentionality behind that, but it's different in person. So when you're virtual, it's going to take a little extra effort. But I think, just being willing to put yourself out there. I once walked around with a cart full of Christmas cookies and gave them away so I could announce that I was having office hours. I called it shameless self-promotion, and not in an egotistical way, but in like a program promotion. I guess I should say shameless program promotion, because you need people to know about what you're doing and what you're working on, and you want their buy-in and their investment. And so if you can leverage those relationships and build those relationships, I say it's a challenge because it's really hard at first. And it can take some time, and it takes a lot of energy, and it can feel emotional. So, but if you do the work and you put it in, you'll be much more likely to be successful. And then when you need to rely on those relationships, they're there.
Yeah. There's so much good stuff in there, including the phrase, like, people have a lot of feelings. It's very true. Like, when people have invested, invested their time, or they have attachment to like
Mm-hmm.
things that they've built. You have to understand how to navigate that with nuance. And it goes back to that relationship management and emotional intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You also said a phrase in there, like, you want to hit the ground running and you jump in with both feet. I'm curious, what's maybe the top 1 or 2 skills that you think somebody could bring into a program management job that would allow them to really hit the ground running?
Curiosity and a willingness to learn. I would say that's the biggest thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could bring in to be successful, but really the curiosity and a willingness to learn is what's going to set you up for success. Hopefully, because you were hired because someone saw potential in you to be able to do that job and to have the skills to manage whatever it is whatever program you're managing. So outside of actually being able to do program management, I think those two like traits will help you be successful.
Okay. And then what about the flip side of that? Like, when you come into a position, you're hoping you're bringing something into it where you're going to hit the ground running. But I always say, like, anytime you take a new job, even if you have experience in it, you are going to have to get up to speed on something. What do you think in that kind of first 90 days of a job, you really have to focus on getting up to speed on? You've mentioned several things already, but what would you say?
I think that first 90 days is really dedicated to learning about the program you're running and talking to people. And sometimes that gathering information, I guess, would be a bigger way to say it, because it can be talking to people. It also can be benchmarking and researching best practices in your industry and in your field. Especially if you're building out something, or you were brought in to make something bigger.
Well, so I want to end with two more questions for you.
Okay.
A little bit of, you spent a decade doing program management, and now you've kind of elevated yourself to the next level, right? Director of operations and communication. How do you think about the difference of what you were doing previously to what you're doing now? I
would say that program management is still a huge part of my job. That's part of why the title of operations, because it allows me to do program management and other things. But I think when you do program management, I don't think operations and PM is that different. And, it might be the focus that you're looking at, but essentially you're running something and you're working on like different cadences. You may be doing policies and process. You're working with people, and it's just what your focus is a little different. So like now I have a bigger view of I'm more looking at company operations and then communications as a part of that. Whereas in program management, I did program operations and I did communications as part of the program. But now being a director of operations and communications, I have the opportunity to take those experiences and apply them on a larger scale.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know anyone who's considering program management will definitely find this to be useful. So my last question for you is, I know you're a big connector and you're an extrovert, like we met because I think you reached out and connected with me a while back. Who would you most like to connect with and engage with if people want to reach out to you?
Oh, I don't know. I love coaching and mentoring folks. So I'm happy to have well, it's not really mentoring or coaching, but I love having informational conversations. So if anybody wants to chat about they're looking to get into it and they're curious. I'm also super passionate about industry changers. I think that our backgrounds in a different industry sometimes get discounted, even though I believe whether you're doing K-12 education or higher education, and I'm married to a teacher, so I've seen it from that level too, is you're scrappy. You have worked at all hours of the night. You've seen all sorts of things. I've dealt with crisis management in ways that I won't talk about on video, but it makes you scrappy, it makes you resilient, and it makes you a really hard worker. And then I think you can appreciate when you're not in constant crisis mode, because a lot of times in higher ed and in even K-12 too, like you're constantly on, and that's exhausting. And so to be able to go to a job that gives you more balance, more freedom, and lets you focus on what you really love doing instead of doing 100 different things can be really, really valuable. And those experiences often aren't understood unless someone's done it. And so, yeah, if you want to talk about like how to frame those experiences, I'm still a work on progress on that, but always happy to chat through it.